Well, good afternoon, everyone. I nearly said good evening then. I chose this title because there's a lot of interest in the Masters, and there's lots of misconceptions about the Masters. These days on the internet we read and see all sorts of stuff about people being ascended Masters because they did a weekend course, it cost 800 quid, so they're entitled to go around and say, I am an ascended Master. Well, what are you doing here then? But anyway, I thought I'd give you this talk so we can clear up some of these matters and we can get a proper theosophical perspective on it. So, ascended Masters, channeled Masters, Himalayan Masters. What is a Master? Example, the Master K.H. Kutumi Lal Singh, who with the Master M. Mora started the Theosophical Society nearly 150 years ago. The Master D.K. Dwal Kul, who supposedly worked through Alice Bailey to write all those books, which are very popular today. Others include the Masters Hilarion, Serapis, and the English Master, who some say was the poet Robert Browning. It's not confirmed, but that's largely what's held to be true. Also well known is the Master Count Saint-Germain, who it is thought inspired the Order of the Rosy Cross, the Rosicrucians, and also instigated the French Revolution. I'm not so sure about that one. But anyway, these are the things that go around about them historically. A Master is one who has attained the 5th degree of initiation, and we'll be looking at the initiations later on. They are initiates of the 5th degree, having the ability to center consciousness in higher mind, buddhi, manas, and the vehicle and consciousness of the spiritual trinity. The spiritual trinity is Atma, Buddhi, Manas. And when we say Manas, we mean higher mind in that respect, because the mind is in two aspects, higher and lower. So the permanent vehicle of the monad is Atma, Buddhi, and higher Manas. We don't think with our higher mind. We do register all sorts of impressions, and we can use the higher mind to transmit and to filter spiritual impulses from the higher self into the personality if we are so attuned. And that takes some development on our part. Again, we'll look at that later. The Masters hold the highest position in the vanguard of humanity. They pass beyond concerns of self. I think, if anything, that more than anything sums up what they're about. They've passed beyond concerns of their self. Now, we're nowhere near that, are we? Let's be honest, I'm not. And until you can say that you have no concern for yourself whatsoever, you're not a Master, and you're a long way from it. Even if you have paid 800 quid for a weekend course. So they've mastered their lower natures and transformed them from distractions and obstacles into well-ordered instruments of spiritual will. And this tells us that they haven't done away with the personality, but it's now under their control. And I think that's, another key feature, really. They have brilliant intellects. You can see that from the kind of work they've done over the ages, and the way that they have such an astute, astounding knowledge of the wisdom teachings, which are not, by any sense, easy to understand. And yet every Master has verified the truth of those teachings from generation to generation. And if you read the Mahatma letters, you'll see what I'm talking about. They are known for a distinct lack of vanity, despite their nobility and their years ahead of their peers. They are modest enough to term themselves as the elder brothers and servants of humanity. In their own words, they live to serve and to guide, yet in their guidance they never interfere with the workings of free will, for that is against divine law. They suggest, but never coerce. They inspire, but never command. An ascended master does not incarnate in line with the cyclic law, but can choose to be born for a specific purpose, and we have historic accounts of that. A master can hold some of the sub-frequencies of the etheric, astral, and mental bodies throughout, together after physical death, and can live exceptionally long lives. If you go into the history of the Master KH, for instance, you find that he was around in the 1800s. He was at the Great Exhibition, for instance. And yet Blavatsky and others have vouched to his physical existence well after that. And he was already quite old at that point. He was said to have studied at Oxford as well. So these masters have been around quite a while. Some of them seem to have lived exceptionally long lives, well over 100 years, and yet never looked a day over 50. In this state of holding the physical and etheric bodies together after death, they can enter the field of awareness of a person who is sensitive and receptive state or consciousness, such as a chela or a disciple. And there are others even more advanced. In many instances, the masters will I'm sorry, I find it hard to read this from that distance. In many instances, the masters will defer to the Mahachohan, known as the Lord of Civilization and head of the Himalayan masters. The Lord Maitreya stands at an even higher stage of consciousness. He is known in the Orient as the Bodhisattva, to Mohammedans as the Imam Mahdi, in India as Sri Krishna, to Christians as the Christ, having taken many roles over many centuries. So, what is the work that the masters do then? They inspired Blavatsky and Alcott to form the TS, although at the time some of the other masters were a bit doubtful about that, and probably still are. But they decided it was well timed and well worth doing. You see, when the teachings were given out under the name of Theosophy, it was the first time in human history that these teachings were made public. We have to realize this. What we take for granted now has been revealed to us for the first time in human history. Before that, you had to join a secret order, a special order, usually in a remote location. And you had to prove yourself worthy to receive them. Years of long, hard work on yourself before you could be given the teachings that we are now given for free. And this is why some of the older masters were not happy about KH and M for doing this. They said, do realize that in doing this you're going to take on the karma of all this. And you needn't do that because it could be quite drastic. And they both agreed to take the responsibility for what they were doing And when you think that they didn't have to have that kind of karma in the situation they were in, that was a great sacrifice on their part, to put their faith in Blavatsky, Alcott and the others, and eventually to humanity, because this was going to be made public. And we should remember the sacrifice that they made there. So, in cooperation with the root Manus, they oversee the decline, destruction, and rebirth of races. We know about the collapse of Atlantis and Lemuria before that. We're almost seeing the collapse of the Aryan race, which is our race, with climate, the way the climate's going and the destruction of the planet that we're every day engaged in. We're trying to pull ourselves back from the brink now, but are we? I don't know. But they work with the root Manus. Those are the great beings who oversee the birth of nations, the birth of the root races and the decline of the root races, because there's a cyclic effect going on here. The root races don't go on forever. They can't go on forever because the way evolution works is cultures, people, nations start off in ignorance, primitive, and then gradually grow eventually into civilized, or so-called civilized state, from which then the danger is that self-interest and personal power, egotism and greed and the grasp for wealth starts to take over. We can see that now. And so that growth of evolution is coming into a dead end, and therefore that root race has served its purpose. It's gone as far as it's going to go. And so a fresh start is made. Blavatsky says it quite clearly, every race will come to this end. And we shouldn't fear it, because we're only talking about losing the ability to be born physically for a while. And even then, some of our race will continue on, as did the Atlanteans, into Egypt, South America and so forth. The Lemurians before that. So basically, the masters have a big part in this. They have to make sure that the cycle turns in its due course, and that everything is put in place for renewal. These things can't be just allowed to be destroyed and then left lying around. They have to be organized. And the masters do a lot of that work. They also, of course, as we know, they hold the keys to the ageless wisdom. And they hold that in trust for humanity. They reseed it into each race and also to individuals and groups when appropriate. This is why you find that when you look at the history of the root races, you see that each race sort of starts off in ignorance. Thank you. And yet, at some point, this knowledge emerges, and we get some sort of access to it, even if it's only through the secret societies that spring up. And working at the highest levels of the mental plane, they send out thought forms of high intellectual power. And these are available then to men of genius working at the frontiers of science, philosophy, humanitarianism, and all walks of life. You know that sometimes, these eureka moments come in science and in other areas of endeavour. And it's just like pops into, you've got a problem that goes on for ages and ages, and then someone will solve it. Like the DNA molecule, for instance. It's not just all hard work, it's a bit of inspiration as well. It comes from within. At the astral mental level, they work with their younger pupils inspiring them to service and to attain higher ideals. Some masters supervise the schools of learning on the astral mental plane, where they contact their younger disciples during sleep or in the after-death state. At the etheric level, they can work with healing energies and the chakras, but much of this work remains secret to all but the highest disciples because of its dangerous implications and the convolutions of karmic accountability. There's a lesson there, because we have to understand that when we interfere with the natural order, and disease is part of the natural order, and so is all forms of ill health, when we interfere with that, we're delving into the very, very intricate workings of karma. Nothing on this earth plane happens that is not the result of karmic action. Nothing just happens spontaneously. Everything is brought on by our own actions. And if we're ill, if we're suffering, then that is something that we've earned that in one way or another. If not in this life, usually in a life before. And we can interfere with that. Doctors do it all the time. We go to the doctor and we say, I've got this pain in my leg. And if you get a miracle drug and a cure and the pain goes away, but it's your karma to suffer something like that, the chances are it'll come back in another form. And so when we start to look at healing, at whatever level, we have to realize that we're interfering with karmic consequences of a very deep order. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I'm saying we have to be mindful of the fact, the forces that we're dealing with. And so when the masters do engage in this kind of work, they do so after, weighing all the consequences. And you recall that Madame Blavatsky was ill for many, many years. And at some point when she was writing the doctrine, she was so ill she could hardly carry on. And Alcott and others feared that when they went to bed at night, in the morning she'd be dead. She was so bad. But the Master visited in the night, and he gave her his energy. And in the morning she was well again in writing. And they couldn't get over this until it was revealed that the Master visited and gave her his power. But you see, they'd worked out the consequence of this because they wanted the teachings to come out. So even though it was HBB's karma to have this illness and this disability, they were prepared to stand against that in order to get the work finished. And also, we need to realize that the Earth itself is being constantly bombarded by energies from the cosmos, from other galaxies and from elsewhere in the cosmos. We're being bathed in these energies, and some are of a very high energy order. Some of it is worth the Masters transmuting them, transforming them down, so that we can actually benefit from them, and the Earth can benefit from them. And they do a lot of that work along with Devas, who also stand at the edges of the Earth's atmosphere, transforming these energies and dealing with them as they come in. And some of them have to be diverted because we're not ready to receive energies of that order. In today's world, we are bombarded with information at every level. The internet and so forth, the television. And it's the same in the spiritual world of spiritual seeking. A spiritual student now, a seeker, is bombarded with all kinds of information, all kinds of offers of enlightenment and contact with masters and so forth. How can we be sure that what we encounter in this way, these claims, how can we be sure that they're genuine and not just people deluded? because we can easily be drawn into these things. And the truth of the matter is, we can't know beyond our own ability to discriminate. This is why it's so important, and why we're so, we're told all the time, we have to develop discrimination. It's one of the key factors for a student to develop. If you can't discriminate between the true and the false, then there's no difference between the two. You're just going to fall for everything that glitters. And you have to develop this discrimination. You'll never do that if you go along with the herd mind. By the herd mind, I mean the common view, the common, the consensus of everything. People don't think about things, you just take it from a headline in the newspaper. What use is that? You have to learn to think for yourself. If you borrow other people's thoughts, what use is it having your own? You've got to use your own thinking, and that's got to be driven by your sense of discrimination, your sense of right and wrong, true and false. It's not easy. It takes a lifetime to cut through these things. Generally, you get to sort of my age, the last legs, when you start to see, finally, at a glance, what's true and what's false. Up to that point, you have to sort of wonder, well, that looks good, I'm not sure about that, but it looks good. Discrimination is the key that we must seek to achieve in our spiritual journey. Without that key, we're not going to get very far. We cannot judge the message by the messenger. If the message is relevant to you, it is true for you. I recall, some years back, I was quite taken by the books of Carlos Castaneda, the teachings of Don Juan and so forth. I found them really humorous to read and very good on some very key points about development. And then the book started to come out saying, oh, it was a load of rubbish, he made it up, he invented it all. There never was a Don Juan. I followed him about, and he wasn't there when he said he was going to be there. And it's all a load of rubbish. Didn't bother me in the least. I looked at that idea and I thought, that doesn't matter to me whether he actually met a person called Don Juan, whether he made it all up under the hallucinogenic drugs, LSD or whatever. I don't care. What matters to me was what he said relevant to me? And it was, a lot of it was, and I got a lot from it. That's what matters. So, if it's true for you, go with it for a time. You may change later. And because, we have different needs at different stages of our journey. We all do. And sometimes it's necessary to fall for misdirection and promises of fast, effort-free rewards so that we may learn the hard way the difference between truth and fiction. But there are some basic guidelines that we would do well to take notice of regarding information from and about the Masters. To begin with, Masters do not concern themselves or others with making money or with setting up and running businesses. So if you see an advert saying, the Master KH has started this charity and you need to send your money now because we're doing... No. They won't involve themselves with money or business. They're not interested in fame or notoriety. In fact, they shirk it. They'll avoid that. They do not support political parties. They abhor violence. They will never engage or encourage anybody to engage in any form of violence, whether mental, emotional, or verbal. They will not condone privilege or any sort to individuals or groups. They won't bestow their blessing on any group. Everything's got to be equal to them. They inspired the TS, but they also inspired many other groups and activities. So what then is truth? What is genuine? Are there levels of truth? Let the theosophical ideals guide us in truth. That's the best way. Truth in thought. This brings understanding and dispels confusion. Truth in feeling brings harmony and well-being and dispels turmoil and want. Truth in action brings beauty, art, humanitarianism, service, and dispels inertia. Theosophy felicitates perfection through wisdom, purity, and above all, through service. We hear this a lot, don't we? It's about service. But really, it is about service. That again sums up the Masters. Service, 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 service. You need to work on yourselves, of course you do. You need to develop your own consciousness. You need to expand. You need to learn to discern between true and false. You need to do all these things. You need to walk the path. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to service. So if you're not serving in some way or other, however great or small, you're going nowhere. So I just mentioned the path. What is the path? Krishnamurti said, truth is a pathless land. That upset a few people. It did. But it's true because all monads, souls, spirits, are individual and must walk their own path to truth. Therefore, truth has no defined path leading to it that all must follow. It isn't one thing that we all funnel into and trudge along. We all go there by treading our own path. We arrive at the same place, but through our own direction and our own needs and our own development. That has to be true, doesn't it, really? But there is, of course, a cyclic evolution which all must complete. The third proposition of the Secret Doctrine talks about the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul, which is an aspect of the absolute principle behind all manifestation, and the obligatory pilgrimage for every soul through the cycles of incarnation or necessity in accordance with cyclic and karmic law during the whole term. This is one hell of a statement. This means that all the way through every life wave, from elemental to human and beyond, there are no shortcuts to this journey, this evolution. All monads, spiritual beings, must make this pilgrimage. There's no shortcut, there's no way to go, use some kind of magic or some miracle awakening. You just have to do the whole journey. And that journey isn't just this journey in this human life now in this few years. That's nothing, that's a speck or it's one grain of sand on a beach. This journey starts way back before then. It starts before the earth, even the earth was formed. We were on that journey then. Can you imagine that? I mean, I'm saying this a lot, so I've got a sort of imaginary picture of it, but it's very vague, of course. But you see, when we start this journey, we start in the first life wave, which is the first elemental kingdom. And in that kingdom, we are simply setting about trying to establish certain archetypes. There's nothing else there at that point. Eventually we'll migrate into the second elemental kingdom where we try and establish sort of feelings and emotional content into those archetypes. And then the third elemental kingdom, where we start to put energetic structures to them. And these things are what evolve eventually to the archetypal patterns of the mineral kingdom. When the monads enter the mineral kingdom, they're really asleep, almost dead. We've been there. I'm not talking about something else. This was us millions upon billions of years ago. And it wasn't on this planet, I can tell you that. Because this planet's only been around a very small portion of that time. And of course, eventually we have to pass through the vegetable kingdom. We have to go through all that. And then the animal kingdom. And that includes all the insects and everything. And then finally, we enter the human life wave. And we start to get individual consciousness, we start to be able to think for ourselves, we get individual. And it's only then that we start to realize that there's a world around us that is more complex than we can just see in front of our face. If you spend time thinking about this journey, you realize how incredible it is. And we've been on this, in this human life wave for over 1 million years. And we've reached the point now where we're questioning what we are, where we came from, and where we're going. We won't find a stone doing that, or a dandelion, or even a dog, or a horse. So we've come a long way. And that's what this proposition tells us, that we have to go through every stage. And then the Masters are telling us we have to go through every race. Some people won't like that idea. And then, the truth of that smacks you in the face and says, what's all this discrimination? How can you possibly discriminate against other races when you've got to be that race, or you have been that race, and there's no difference, they're your brothers and sisters? That just shows how ignorant humanity can be. And what we have to shake off, these shackles of ignorance. And it's this knowledge that enables us, it gives us the power to see beyond race, to see beyond gender, and to see beyond the superiority of the human race, because it's not superior to the animals, it's not superior to the vegetables or the minerals. It's just at a different stage. We really have to wake up to what we really are and where we really are at. The awakening soul, or monad, goes through gradual changes which are represented by what we call initiations on the path to discipleship and self-mastery. These are initiations of both minor and major varieties. So to put that in a nutshell, to begin with, we have to go through the same initiations, but in a minor sense, in an everyday personality sense. And then when we completed that, we have to go through the same initiations in a major level, which is at a much higher level than it's a non-personal level. And the minor initiations are often seen in people's lives, our lives, you and me, sometimes we're not even knowing it. If we could have a magic tool to open everybody's soul up and see where we're at, some of us would run out, but we would see that people, quite a few of us here, have already passed through some of the minor initiations. Some of us will be aware of that because they've felt the trauma of it in their lives. Others won't be aware of it. But we all have to go through them anyway. And we'll have a look at what they are in a moment. Just an aside now, some people have asked me, the work that we do in our lives, is it lost after we're dead and we come back to another life? Do we have to start again all over? Well, diploma students will know that that's not true. We don't. There's things called permanent atom scandals. And so that every life that we come back to, we have the opportunity, courtesy of karma, to catch up with where we left off in the previous life. What we see when we look at people's lives is that we get so busy, we get so distracted that we don't really catch up to begin with. And for majority of people, we catch up towards old age. When our families have settled and gone and we've retired, and then we start thinking, people start to die around us. And when that happens, we start to wonder what it's all about. And then it starts to come back to us. We learn very quickly, as though we've known before, and we have known before. And so we spend the last 10, 15, 20 maybe years actually carrying on the work that we did in the previous life. It's a bit of a shame that we've spent all the life, but that's never wasted. But it is a fact that as we reborn time and time again, we catch up earlier and earlier. So that we find people today, looking around now, I see some young people, and they're obviously catching up much earlier than some of us. And that gives you longer to actually do more permanent work on yourself. The sooner you get that insight and start searching, and you can keep your life in order and do it, the quicker you will evolve. And the key to evolving is to start taking responsibility for your own actions. That is the key. And that is the measure of a person too, at this day and age. People blame circumstances, politics, governments, other people, family, whatever, for their state of being, then they're a long way. You've got to start taking responsibility yourself. And we also come across other members of our soul group. Once we start to work again on the spiritual path, we start to meet people who are connected to us in a soul way. We tend to incarnate with our soul group, some closer, some not so close, and some even further away. But we do nevertheless tend to come in contact with them. It's easier now with the internet. You could have someone born in Japan or somewhere. And it may not be a conscious act, but nevertheless you gravitate to people who you've got this sympathy to and this harmony with. It's two perfect strangers sometimes. You can be at the bus stop and start talking to someone and think, 10 minutes later you think, you know that person inside out, and why haven't I met you before? Where do you live? Incredible. So, the initiations are marked by degrees. When I said that the Masters are 5th degree initiates, that's 5th degree of the major initiations. We need to take a look at the minor initiations first. We'll just check out the time. Oh dear. I think we have to go for an hour now, rather than 3/4. I'm digressing too much. The minor initiations can be seen corresponding to the seasons. It's a good analogy. So the first one is like spring. When you undergo the first minor initiation, the hidden potentials within you start to bud, just like the flowers. In terms of mind, this initiation manifests as the need to inquire, to seek truth, which we're doing today. It involves the acquisition of seed thoughts or inspiration. And we will learn to concentrate. In terms of emotion, there will be conflict with established conditioning. This is where we start to find ourselves at odds with the conventional thought. We will need to go beyond everyday fears and learn to resist peer pressure. In terms of action, we will be driven to campaigning, to protesting, to defend those weaker than ourselves. We will often set out on a mission to convert others, to change the world, to engage in charitable work. We will be compelled to stand up and be counted, to stand out from the crowd. So those are possible effects of the first minor initiation from the view of our thinking, feeling and actions. The second minor initiation is like summer. There's an unfolding of the bud. Potentials begin to flower. In terms of mind, we knuckle down to some serious learning. Our understanding improves. We grow stronger mentally. We learn to meditate. In terms of emotion, we should stop blaming others and learn to help ourselves. In terms of action, we develop a healthier attitude to work. We find joy in everything. We want to set examples to others. And the third initiation is like autumn. The fruit begins to ripen, and the seed is set for future attainment. In terms of mind, learning bears fruit. We become teachers. Meditation reaches contemplation, insight. We gain awareness and at-one-ment. In terms of emotion, we take control of our feelings. Psychic energy starts to awaken. We acquire a pronounced sense of calmness. In terms of action, opportunity and willingness to take office comes into our lives. Because we develop a strong sense of responsibility, we become reliable and dependable. The fourth minor initiation is like winter. It is a time of rest, a withdrawing. It is also a time to plant the spring's seed. In terms of mind, we attain wisdom through assimilation of lessons learned. But we enter a time of great testing. If we pass the tests, our thinking can be merged with life's purpose. In terms of emotion, we have a loving attitude to all things. Our heart is pure. We have a devotion to spiritual ideals. We are able to surrender the demands of the lower personality. In terms of action, we will be dedicated to serving the divine purpose. Our lives are one of sacrifice to the great plan. So these are just pointers, snapshots of the journey from the point of view of the minor initiations, which mostly affect the personality rather than the spirit. And most of us at this time are going through this process at some stage or another. And so it is that these minor initiations that should concern ourselves most. We can look at the stages of the minor initiations in more depth, and in particular at the dangers and the pitfalls that set us back until we overcome not circumstances but ourselves, our own weaknesses. Pride comes before a fall. These words have been given as a warning for ages, and they will still be true in all future times. But the first pitfall of the disciple is ignorance. The second is pride. The third is power. And the fourth is complacency. We start from a place of ignorance. In that condition, we enter the labyrinth of choices, the clamour of the spiritual marketplace. There are cries on every hand, appealing for our attention, our time, our money, our belief, and our allegiance. We eagerly sign up to the first glittering promises of power, secret or superior knowledge. We want to feel special, superior, and we want power from secret knowledge. And so we search and we learn. We gain new ideas and new words that sound impressive. People notice us and we can impress. But this is not real spiritual occult knowledge. It is not of true worth. Many of us fall at this early stage because we choose falsely. We fail to see beyond the promises of miracle and magic, of the power to impress the ignorant. We are looking for an easy ride, shortcuts to power from secret knowledge. But what we have learned is mostly worthless and just another form of ignorance. And our ignorance is supported by egotism, which all too soon leads to disillusionment. I've seen this in my life, people around me, probably myself at an early stage, but I've definitely seen it in other people. There was a friend of mine who sat for something like 10 years with a blanket over his head. Not continually, but he did it every night. And after 10 years, he suddenly said, nothing's ever happened. Nothing at all has happened in all that time. And so from then on, he gave up everything to do with spirituality. But he was dead keen before. He was learning, he was interested in things. Then he got this message from a guru that all he had to do was sit with a blanket over his head and recite a mantra and he'd be enlightened. And so the first enemy wins the day. We waste time chasing these glittering images, seeking advantage, status, power, only to find that the glittering prize we couldn't wait to grasp is not gold, but the fool's gold of egotism and greed. However, with persistence and a great deal of effort, returning to study time after time, after each knockback, we can eventually actually become very knowledgeable and start to understand things about life that ordinary people cannot even begin to imagine. We have overcome our first enemy. And so comes the second, pride. Having finally overcome our first enemy, ignorance, we fall into the deadly snare of pride. And this is our downfall, a fall into darkness and into a cycle that will tear us from the path with consummate ease. This second enemy wins the day unless we learn fast the lessons of humility. For that which we learned, that precious knowledge which we fought long and hard to acquire, is worthless without the final chapter, that which holds and brings it all into a true knowledge. This is the essential perspective of the humble heart. Without this, we become intolerant, boastful, superior, egotistical, and a general pain in the well. But with humility, formed from true understanding, we can overcome the pride factor and rise above the petty concerns of the average man or woman. We then gain a quiet confidence in life's processes, seeing the perfect order in all things, and sensing the divine plan working ever towards perfection in its cyclic progressions. We begin to truly see the hidden secrets of life's processes, and so we reach a place of power. We begin to have real power because we can see how things really work. We have the exceptional insights of higher knowledge, and this includes knowledge of the psycho-emotional patterns that drive all human beings in everyday world affairs. We have encountered our third enemy, power. This is the widest, deepest pitfall to fall into. Pure indeed is the soul who can overcome this temptation with its easy rewards. Power is the greatest corrupter. We fall under its spell so easily. We have real power, surely we must use it. How many times do ordinary people say, if I was in charge, I'd do this or I'd do that? As we reach the place of power, we really can change things. We have the secrets that are unknown to ordinary mortals. It is easy then to start thinking that we should control things, people, situations, for the good of course, because we know best with our superior knowledge. But in doing this, we will usually take away power or control from others, and this is a form of evil. You cannot use power to take away other people's power. The only power you can use is the power to control yourself, not other people. And because of this personal power, this is the stage where initiates consciously sometimes choose to take the left-hand path, to become dark brothers, dugpas, power brokers, feeding on people's poverty, weakness and ignorance. And we can only overcome this very potent enemy when we can truly apply our powers to controlling and changing ourselves, and then use it to empower others, not weaken them. Our power must enable us to break the confines of ignorance in others as well as ourselves. Then, truly free, we may seek liberation. We have overcome our most fearsome enemy, power, but now we enter the disarming world of our last enemy, complacency. This is a very subtle enemy, hardly seen in such, but rather more as a friend. It is like a dream. Nothing is real anymore. Everything and everyone seems like so many phantoms. All of life becomes one great illusion, the Mahamaya of the Buddha. We have worked hard, overcome so many hardships and enemies. We have given up many of the old cherished delights of the ordinary person. We have served, put our own needs to one side for an uncaring and ungrateful world. We deserve rest. We have surely earned it. This is like old age. And so why not let others take up the work? We are tired. It's time to let go and dream of higher things. And in such thinking, we have fallen easy prey to the last and probably the most powerful enemy of all, complacency. Our victory has not been forcefully snatched from our grasp, but simply taken from us, almost unnoticed by the gentle, warm and soft hand of final reward. But the battle for the lower self is never won. No one in the four realms is beyond compromise. We may withdraw from the outer battle for a time of consolidation, for a period of assimilation and adjustment. This is to be expected for a short while. But the path to perfection and the major initiations sometimes stretches before us, spiraling ever out of sight into the dizzying heights of service to humanity, sacrifice, and the quest for spiritual wholeness. I will stop there, and if you like, we can continue after a break. Okay, so we'll finish this off now. What I'll do is I'll go through the major initiations, and then we can have a discussion and questions and answers about it all. All this minor initiations, which tend to disrupt our lives once we get deeper into it. We tend to, if we're not careful, we can lose friends quite easily, because we become a bit obsessed with it all. And like in the first initiation, you get on like a mission thing, where everybody's got to understand this philosophy. It's brilliant. But people don't want to be bothered, and then you become a pain in the... So basically, even when you've reached the peak of that, you're still living in the everyday world, and that's got to be taken into account, because you're dealing with people around you all the time in society and the demands of society. It's a lot easier when you're getting on and you're more or less living a sedate life with just a few friends, and you've retired and you're not going to the workplace anymore. So you can cope with it easier then. You not as conflicted. But the likes and dislikes of everyday society are still there within our understanding, even though in a sense we've gone beyond them. It's hard to find a balance between the demands of society and those of our higher selves. depends what kind of society we move in. But generally speaking, there's conflicts there all the time. And this conflict will bring us down unless we can find compromise. The key there is compromise. I was just saying to some people during the break, I've had a friend for over 20 years, my closest friend, Graham. And he was not in the very least interested in anything to do with anything psychic or spiritual, even though he knew I was, he knew what I was into. He knew the stuff I put on the internet. He knew became president of the society. And I saw him almost on a daily basis. But we never talked about it because he made it clear that he wasn't interested. Yet we had over 20 years of very deep, strong relationship. We had other things in common, music, art. And that's what mattered. I knew he'd come to it at some point in another life or whenever, it doesn't matter. And so we have to find a compromise. We can't just be choosing and say, I'm not having a friend unless he's into Theosophy. In that case, you're going to lose out, I can tell you. So it takes the very best in us to accomplish that. The demands and compulsions of this force will stay with us all the way through the minor initiations. It will only disengage fully when we reach the first major initiation. The Masters have seen all this for themselves, and they watch the efforts of the would-be disciples struggling on the path towards their lofty abode. Make no mistake, the Masters are watching for people turning on to the spiritual world. To them, you're like a light in the darkness. It's almost as though they're looking at a dark field, and then, up pops a light. Up, there's another one. Pop, there goes another one. Because you're lighting up your mental body, and your spiritual body is resounding to it. Right at the beginning, when you first say, oh, I like this Theosophy, it's brilliant. Boom, up goes the light, and the Master go, there's another one. Well, they don't follow you around and watch what you're doing. They're not into all that. But you're on the list. You're there, and you know, in a way, they're overseeing you with interest. They're interested in your career, but they can't interfere. You see, they can't intervene and say, "Don't do that. You'll do better if you do this." They have to respect your free will. They have to respect your karma. They can't interfere with any of that. But as you get more and more evolved, higher, your consciousness expands to higher and higher levels. They can inspire you. Inspiration is not the same as control or you know, giving orders out or asking for this, that and the other, advice. It's not the same as advice. Just, you know, I get inspired by all sorts of things. Just something on the television, on an ordinary program. Or some music. Music particularly inspires me. And I wonder somehow where some of these lyrics came from. Some amazing spiritual lyrics in the guise of ordinary love songs. I can quote from Michael Gomes from his introduction to the Secret Doctrine commentaries. We stand before the mysteries of life. We catch a glimpse of the awful depths of our own being and of those heights to scale which we must become gods. It's from the doctrine, obviously, but I mean, don't be frightened of the word gods. You know, we are told that we are on our way to becoming gods, not God, but gods, i.e. reach our full spiritual potentials as human beings. And as a life wave, as a whole, we will reach a dimension where we become the fourth creative hierarchy. That's like gods. That's what we're heading for. Not little you and little me, but together. Which is why the Masters emphasize so much about brotherhood. Because it's together that we're doing this, even though we're all going our own way at the present time. In a famous comment to members of the TS, the Master KH said, "Though you will fail, time after time, yet try. And that's all that can be expected of us, is that we try. Don't ignore it, even if we fail. Get up, have another go. Sometimes we have to wait a bit till our failure, as it were, and our disappointment with ourselves fades a little bit, then we can have another go, try to become better than we are. So he or she who does their best cannot do any better. And the difference between the minor and the major initiations is that the minors concern the personality mostly, while the majors concern the control and ultimate transcendence of the personality by the spirit. The path of self-interest is like a magnet, where the power of the soul attracts ever more material to it, thus becoming overburdened and weighed down. Such a soul is unable to ascend to the splendour of spiritual perfection. The path of service, by contrast, is like radiation, where the powers of the soul are given freely for the benefit of others. Self-interest draws things to you. It weighs you down. It stops you ascending. But service, you're giving out for the benefit of people. And you're none the less for it. In fact, I would say you are the greater for it, but in subtle ways that you can't measure. Such a soul shines bright in the darkness of the material world, and it is thus a beacon for weary pilgrims. The work of the minor initiations gives rise to and builds the causal body, a centre of consciousness bridging higher and lower centres of manas or mind, through the ring pass not between spirit and personality. These initiations or stages of growth enable the causal body to grow into a fit vehicle for the awakening higher self. Only when this transformation work has been completed by the lower self in the minor initiations can the higher self awaken to its latent powers. And this results in the first major initiation. At the moment of a major initiation, there is a momentary union or yoga between the awakened soul or higher self and the divine monad. The monad flashes its divine light into the causal body and temporarily fills it with divine power. The Star of Bethlehem is an allegory of this initiation. It is sought by the three wise men of body, emotions and mind. We look at this, all the Bible stories are full of this occult stuff. The three wise men represent the body, emotions and mind. They yield up their gifts to the higher self, which shines as the star of the monad, or the Star of Bethlehem. Myrrh, which was the substance used for embalming the body. Frankincense, which is used in the churches for calm emotions and purified emotions. And gold, which represents purified mind. At the first major initiation, the three law principles have caused a cease to register anything that is in any way alien to the selfless nature of the higher self. Absolute self-sacrifice and unwavering service to humanity is the mark of the first degree initiate. That's something, isn't it? Well, I'm a long way from that. I really am. I'll do my bit here and there, but absolute self-sacrifice and unwavering service to humanity is the mark of the first higher degree initiate. The second initiation is likened to baptism. In the Bible again you see Jesus goes down to the Jordan And John the Baptist, he dips him in the water and so forth. And he says to him, you should be doing this to me, because he recognized a high initiate when he saw one. And it said that when Jesus lifted out of the water, a dove descended from heaven onto his head. A metaphysical dove. Water symbolizes emotion. And here the Spirit has completely overcome the power of emotion. Emotion will still exist, but it is completely at the behest of the Spirit, which can control it in every way. I can't. You'll see me when I'm driving. You cut me up at your peril. The third initiation concerns the complete transfiguration of the personality by the power of the Spirit. The law of sacrifice dominates the life of the disciple, and the mind is a servant of the Spirit. And the fourth initiation involves the transcending of the higher self by the monad or spirit. It's the higher self, sometimes referred to as the soul, that will have been thought to have been the go-between, the personality and the monad. And in this, will in most cases have been thought of by the disciple as the actual spirit. I've had this thing with people for many, many years now. My soul is my higher self. My higher self is my spirit. These labels get on your nerves, don't they? I mean, they cause so much confusion. But here it's saying clearly, and these are not my words, that the spirit transcends the higher self or soul. You see, because the higher self and soul are really to do with the causal body. Throughout most of our personality evolution, we consider the highest within us to be our soul or our personality, which is our causal body, that link between lower mind and higher mind. As we start to awaken, that link becomes stronger. And so we, quite rightly, imagine that's our higher self and that's our spirit. But there's an even higher level, and that's the Atma itself, which is the monad, that individual spark of divinity. That is above the higher self and the soul. And at this point, in the fourth initiation, it becomes the dominant factor. The need for further incarnation is no longer necessary, but can be undertaken at the discretion of the disciple. He, she may wish to work in the outer world where there is need. And we can look back over history and we can see great souls that came and lived amongst us and did great things. Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, the list is endless really. And then we come to the fifth initiation, which makes a master of wisdom. And we don't call them masters until they've got this fifth degree. Before that, we call them initiates in the early stages we call them disciples. It's a bit unkind really. And then in the later stages we call them initiates, because they have been initiated and they've just not got that final one. And Dwal Kul, for instance, was said to be an initiate, a disciple of KH. And he was said to have written on behalf of KH some of the Mahatma letters, knowing K's mind very much because they were disciple and master and both at a high level. KH would defer to him when he was busy with other things and he would write letters to people and so forth and write some of the Mahatma letters that we have published. A fifth degree initiate is also labelled, but we don't get bogged down in labels, but is also labelled the Lord of Compassion. And that is because compassion is the keynote of a fifth degree initiate. He is compassion personified. It denotes liberation And finally, that strange and enigmatic word, perfection. Now when we say perfection, let's realise that we're talking about perfection of the possible attainments within a given cycle. Not perfection in terms of the Mahamantara, but perfection within that given cycle. So you see, our masters that we refer to are humans. They're ahead of us, but they're of us. And they've reached perfection in human terms, in our terms. But there are more stages above them that they will be engaged in, or even now. Finally, the further, on the fifth initiation, the further paths are open to the initiate. He can see the paths that lie ahead that he can choose from. They won't choose at that point. He or she will choose once they've partaken of the sixth initiation, because it's 7 in all. So when the sixth initiation is attained, it was then that he or she will choose a deliberate path to work on. And then that would be like the Lord Maitreya, or the Buddha, or whoever, who gives the rest of their evolution, if you like, to that task. Finally, we must understand that initiation is not something conferred. It is not achieved through some ceremony. I want to make this clear. There's no ceremony to initiation. You don't go to a building somewhere and someone strikes you on the head with a rod. Although you read of that kind of stuff. It's not achieved through some ceremony. Some organisations and religions use ceremony in this way, but those initiations are simply admittance into the higher echelons of that organisation. That's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is initiations at stages of the path to spiritual perfection. That's irrespective of any organisation that you may or may not belong to. So spiritual initiations are not conferred. They simply represent stages of growth that have been reached by the individual. And that's why in the minor initiations, half the time you don't even know you've reached it. If you had to go in a building somewhere and get tapped by a rod, then you say, oh, I'm second degree initiation. But you don't. They are achieved by the individual having grown and changed his or her nature by the long process of conscious effort in line with the divine purpose. In your higher self, and maybe in your heart of hearts, you may be aware of where you are up to in these terms, especially with regard to the minor initiations. While in your ordinary mind, you will most probably not be. What matters, though, is that you survive, is that you strive to be the best, the most true that you can be at all times, knowing that you can become far more than you are today. And remember that all beings will reach the goal of perfection sooner or later. Thank you. So if you want to now have a discussion or ask me direct questions, yes.
Madame Blavatsky refers to her visit with Khatumi in the foothills of, was it Himalayas? Now he at that point, I believe, had ascended, and she was still in a physical realm. Am I right?
Who said he was ascended?
Oh, he wasn't at that
Well, I
point.
don't know.
As I understand, he'd ascended, according to what I've read, that he had already ascended.
Okay, so we're now back to terms and labels again, you see.
Okay.
And this is, it's not your fault, honestly, it's not. We all fall for this. The word ascended came in largely in the 60s and 70s with the New Age spiritual revolution. And so lots of terms were brought in at that point. by various commentaries and people, but it was never said in theosophical terms that I know of that the Masters KH and M had ascended. On the contrary, there was lots of references to where they lived as physical beings, and so forth. So I think it says that Madame Blavatsky actually stayed in the Master M's house.
Yeah.
So he couldn't have been ascended in Null's terms, could he? But you could say that because he was reached the fifth degree, that he was an ascended master.
Oh,
It's labels, isn't it?
Right, okay, that makes sense.
If I was fifth degree, I'd say I'd ascended.
Right.
You can make of it what you want.
So ascension doesn't have to be physical, it can be ascension of the body, mind, soul.
Yeah, as we understand it, KH and M and a few of the other masters are actually still living in physical, or they were at that time, whether they are now or not, I don't know, because there's no official contact with them at the moment. I remember that there were masters trawling about the world in Europe during the 19th and early 20th century, doing all sorts of things, like the Count Saint-Germain and so on, and Browning and people like that. They weren't advertising themselves as such, but we know retrospectively that they were busy doing things to change things or inspire movements and so forth.
There's a lady there.
Hmm.
Hi. So, you mentioned that there's 4 minor initiations.
Yes.
And that's the seasons. Is that right?
Well, they can be likened to the season.
Likened to the
Yeah.
season. And the major initiations are the ones that you mentioned.
Yes.
So are you saying the minor initiations take place first? Or
Yes. Yes.
And then it's the
Yes.
major initiations?
Yes.
So I've just got a question about Jesus ascending. Would you say that was an ascension process, or would you say that was a physical ascension or a spiritual ascension? Or had he already reached spiritual perfection?
All right. Well, Jesus is a particular example because in early theosophical literature it was stated that Jesus was overshadowed by the Lord Maitreya, or Christian Christ, so that until he was 30 he was an initiate, a disciple, finishing his not minor initiations but major initiations. And so that as a 4th degree initiate, he came down to work for humanity, which a lot of them do. And when he was 30, the analogy is that he went into the wilderness, which is deep meditation, where he would open himself to be embodied by the Maitreya, or the Christ principle. Now, this is boggy ground, because I've given several talks on the Bible story of Jesus, and it's all absolute allegory. There's nothing, hardly anything that is actual. It all means something else.
Like symbolism? Yeah,
the symbolism, yeah. Like when Jesus brings Lazarus out of the tomb. The idea is that Lazarus was dead and he brought him back to life. The occult truth of that is that Lazarus was dead in the sense that he had no, like my friend Graham, he had no interest in anything spiritual. He wasn't aware of anything. Jesus went in and woke him up spiritually. And then he brought him down to their little feast then, like a Barbie. And there's several things there. I think it was Elizabeth who washed Jesus' feet at that event, because that was symbolic of the personality honouring the spirit. It wasn't to do with a man, Jesus. But then you see, when Jesus comes out of the wilderness, when he's resisted all the temptations, get thee behind me and all that, which are the minor initiations, to say that he'd done all that and more, then he was overshadowed by the Christ. And when he come out of the wilderness, then he starts his ministry. Then he starts to go and preach to people, goes to the temple and all the rest of it. And he only has 3 years of that before he's crucified. And the crucifixion is an analogy. The cross represents the earth. It's north, south, east and west. It's a cross. It means physical life. To be crucified on the cross is to be crucified in physical life. From the point of view of the spirit, this is a crucifixion. It's the hardest road you can imagine. We are nailed to this earth, and it's all analogy. So don't take it as literal, because you'll just confuse yourself. There are writings on these analogies. What I was going to say to you all is, if you want this talk and you give me your email address, I'll attach it to you. I can also attach to you a link to a talk on the symbolism of the Bible, which you would be interested in, and maybe others will be. But I can't go into more now because I forget it all, you see. But I'll need your email addresses, and you can give me those at the end of the talk. Does that help in any way?
It does. I do have another question that's on my mind, to be fair.
Go on.
A burning question. So, a lot of cultures believe that when Jesus ascended, you're saying it's an allegory, but when Jesus, obviously most people believe it's a physical ascension and a spiritual ascension, because God raised him and took him from the earth where he really didn't belong at that point anymore within those people. So he ascended, but a lot of people also believe that the Mayan culture is a society that also ascended as well. So I'm just wondering, what do you think about that?
Well, again, I think you've got to be very careful about the labels here and the allergies. Those allergies they're very, very old, aren't they? They're 2,000 years old. We start thinking we can just unlock them like that or understand them straight off. We're not going to really manage that. The best we can do is compare the occult labeling to what we've been given. And then we can start to make some sense of it. But you have to apply all that to the human condition. It may be a man in the Bible, but it represents humanity, not just the man Jesus. He said that when these initiates come to earth, what they do is they portray the trials and tribulations of humanity and the way forward out of that. And if we start looking at it as an individual life, we lose the point of that. Because it's about humanity, really. So if you bear that in mind, it might...
Very relatable even today.
Yes, it is. Absolutely, yes.
Stories are not alien.
Eternally relatable, yes, because it's a human condition.
Are there any other questions? Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'm interested in what you're saying about the powers. Because at the moment I'm looking into the third object of the society. Is there, and I don't really know what those refer to be honest, the powers latent in man, or as Petra's pointed out, the divine powers latent in man. Obviously you're saying they mustn't be abused. But is there a connection? Is this the same powers? And if so, what are you referring to?
Yeah. Power, that's a strange word, isn't it? Let's change that word for higher knowledge. You see, if you put two people together in a room, and one is ignorant, and the other one is highly educated, and they get into some kind of conflict, it's the highly educated person that's going to come out on top, because the ignorant person doesn't know what he's dealing with. Now, in terms of spiritual growth, it's the same difference. The human being has latent power, just in the same way that a child has latent powers that will develop when he's an adult. So when you look at a baby, you can't see the artist or the engineer or the politician or the orator. Those are in there, but they've got to be developed. They've got to be awakened and developed. And it's the same with humanity. So we have psychic power and we have spiritual power. We know we have physical power. That's what we're mostly engaged in all the time. You also have to realize that evolution is proceeding on three levels, three streams. Spiritually we are evolving. Psychically or psychomentally we are evolving. And physically we're evolving. You may have come across the term the spiritualization of matter and the materialization of spirit, because this is how one thing affects another. Nothing is in isolation. So by coming into the material world, our spiritual selves are helping to materialize physical atoms, to spiritualize physical atoms. They're changing vibrations by us using them. And equally, our spirit is evolving through the experience, even the limitation of of physical existence. So, all these powers, so-called, come from unlocking the potential that's already within us. We're not getting them from outside, they're already within us. We've developed the power of intellect, we've developed the power of thought and emotional response. These are just simple powers, but they're still powers nevertheless when you compare them to other forms of life. Psychic powers are very dangerous. Those are the first ones to start to ripen as you become more further along the path. I've seen many examples in my life of misuse of psychic power, and it's not pleasant. In fact, it's very, very unpleasant. And people fall into it because, like in the pitfalls, power is addictive. It's something that traps you. Once you've got a level of consciousness and knowledge above other people, the human temptation to use that for your own use is something that's really hard to overcome. And it's an early stage, that. Now, on the other hand, spiritual power concerns only and always giving of oneself, taking nothing but giving. The power to give is not something that you can just do automatically. You have to acquire that, because selfishly we don't want to give. If we all were to go out on the street now and pledge all our money, all our wealth from the bank and everything to poor people, how many of us would go and do it? Because we say, well, we need that money. That's mine, you know. I'll give a few bob, but whatever. I walk past someone with a blanket over him in the street and throw a couple of quid down. Do I feel good? Not really. At one time I would have done, but I think, poor bugger, you know, give him something. But there's a lot of difference between that and giving of yourself freely, like a true spiritual person does. When you walk into the presence of a really spiritual person, you can feel it. If such a person walks into a room, the room lights up. It's because they're giving. They've reversed polarity, basically. We have flashes when our polarity reverses. But mostly, it's all to do with us, isn't it? Anything else? Yes.
Sorry, one last question. You said Madame Blavatsky, when she was ill, at nights she was visited by a master, but you didn't tell us.
Master M.
A master.
Moria was her. She was a disciple of Moria, yeah.
Last question.
Last question, what time is it?
Just explain learning.
Yes. If I can use an analogy, it's probably the best way to do this. If I can say that the pure spiritual reality is like a huge bonfire. It's fire. And it consumes and lightens and warms and everything. That's the state of spirit in its oneness, in its unity, itself. But once the cycles of evolution start, the process starts, at some point monads are cast into that cyclic action to go through the different stages. So what a monad is like if you think of a great big bonfire and then sparks are thrown out and they land on the grass in different places. They're the monads. Now, what it takes for a spark, when it lands, it has to consume fuel, otherwise it'll fizzle out. But if it can consume fuel when it lands, it'll grow and it'll start to, a flame will appear. And if it consumes more and more fuel, then it becomes a huge flame. And eventually, it's like its parent, like the bonfire itself. That's an analogy of evolution, because when we are cast out, and we're called monads, this is done by the second logos, the Mahat, the mother, she casts us out into this descending arc into matter. And it's that matter, that experience, that we consume to enlighten and to enlarge our own tiny flame. And this is why I say spirit is evolving as well as everything else, because it's that little flame that has to be fanned through experience and through expression and all that into a divine flame in itself, which it achieves on its return journey. As it goes down into matter, to the material plane, it struggles and struggles, but it's kept alive by consuming experience. And then it starts to make, that experience starts to make sense to it. It starts to process the experience, and it starts to seek its way back to the great fire from which it returned. So a monad is the divine spark. It is what you are. But all monads have the same source, which is this pure spirit. And because of that, and because they never really leave that plane, even though they're going through all this, because in a sense it's their awareness that is pushed out into all this. It's like Krishna says in the Gita, all this I create, yet I remain. That's to say, all this world is of me. It's part of me. But I'm not stuck in it. I'm still here. I'm still me. I remain a divine being. And that's true of all monads. We remain at that high level, yet we are focused, if you like, at these other levels. And when we die and our brain is cut off, that focus beam starts to withdraw back through the planes until it gets to a point where it can't be conscious anymore, and you go into Devashan, and then you're focused back out again to start all over again. But at some point in your career, you withdraw right back into the monad as you go through the major initiations. Then you become one with all life. Imagine that. I've had tiny glimpses of that. I know a lot of people have. But it don't last more than 5 minutes or whatever. But to live like that, that's something else, isn't it? Because this is the difference between the little self and the big self. I'm sat here and you're all sat there, but in reality we're all one. This world outside is really not something else, it is us. We are the world outside. The world outside is us. This is why it's so wrong to pollute and all this climate change we're going through now. We're all starting to panic now because the oceans are full of plastic and everything you eat is full of poison and you can't breathe properly and the ice caps melting and blah, 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 blah. So it's because we have polluted that, and in doing so we've polluted ourselves. 1 in 2 people now are supposed to be going to get cancer. 20 years ago it was 1 in 10, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, 1 in 3. Now it's 1 in 2. In a bit it'll be everybody's got cancer. Because we're polluting ourselves. If I put a gun to your head, I might as well put it to my own head. There is no difference. I only think I'm doing it to you, but in fact I'm doing it to everybody, including myself. We start thinking like that, we're starting to enter the higher realms of evolution. We're starting to get the hang of it, because we spend so much time in isolation. Me. This is me, that's something else. No, it's not. To be one with life is to not know the difference between everything and nothing. It's all one thing. So that's what a monad is. Yeah, this gentleman wants to say, if you don't mind, it's not, well, it is for.
No, up to you, Eric.
Going back about 5 minutes in your delivery, there's a point that I'm not sure. And you mentioned spirituality, which I understand, and let's assume that's, well, it is a positive sort of outlook generally, and development, etc., etc. But then you mentioned something about psychic power, and you said you didn't want to really go there. And I was thinking, well, you implied that that was negative only. So I'm asking, like, specifically, is psychic power, whatever, could you give me or us an example, and whether it's negative and, say, positive?
Right. It's a good question. I think I glossed over it too quickly, didn't I, really? I didn't do it any justice. Having dismissed it, I should really go back and the point is that psychic power is one of the early stages of opening up. Before you can get spiritual power, you'll pass through a stage where you're psychically open up. It's to do with the chakras and all the energy flows in your system and the way your consciousness is relating to the astral world and the etheric world. And so basically, the temptation is to use it for your own good, for your own benefit, not realising that we're all the same anyway, and it's a waste of time to do that. You'll only end up it coming back on you. So really, while psychic power is a negative thing in itself, it's something that can be used for good. You know, you can take a spade and you can dig and plant seed, or you can bash someone over the head with it. It's all about what you do with it, isn't it? So nothing is either good or bad in those terms. It's only what you do with them that's good or bad. And so the biggest test with psychic power is to see it for what it is and get past it, really. Because it's a temptation at first to start saying, you know, I can see you're going to do this, or you look at people, you can read them. I've done that. You can read people, you know, everything they've been through in this life, you know, what they're struggling with, you know what they want, and this is where you can abuse your power, you see, because it's psychic power. It's not pure. It's linking up to someone, and you can harm them through doing that. Now, with spiritual power, you can never harm anything. Spiritual power only gives, it's a benediction. It's nothing more. So psychic power, we will all go through that stage, or we have been through that stage, depending on the way you want to look at it, and we have to outgrow it and put it in perspective and use it very judiciously and responsibly while we have it. At some point, I don't think you'll ever get rid of it until you open up genuine spiritual power. Yeah.
Is it what you're saying? Is it like a person, whoever, is influencing a situation or place or person, whatever, in a particular way? Is that psychic power?
No, that's what can happen. But what psychic power is reading a situation or another person. It's like, you know, I don't know what you're thinking, apart from your question, because I'm not reading your mind, am I? But if I had psychic power, I maybe could read your mind.
Okay.
But to what avail? Why would I want to read your mind? I could do it to impress you, and then maybe I could get some money out of you, or I could get a following. Yeah, but there's no actual benefit from that, is there? You see, your chakras open up along with your expansion of consciousness. I would never, ever recommend that you do exercises to open your chakras. That is so dangerous, and it's such a retrograde step. I don't care how much money you pay to learn about it. Forget it. Don't do it. Don't go there. If you change your way of looking at life, and you work on yourself in terms of, you know, your reaction with people and your life with people, your chakras will open automatically. Then they're opening safely. And when you get psychic power, you'll see what it is. But if you do it artificially, you'll suddenly get all this power and you don't know what to do with it. And it'll just come back on you. It will come back on you. So,
Sorry, but is it not pure because we are not pure?
yes,
Right.
that's right. Because it's like giving a child a gun, isn't it?
It's like with anything, you need ethics. You know?
Yes.
If you've got a talent or a power, it's got to come with ethics.
Yeah.
There's no ethics, and then you're just no
No.
better than animals.
Moral, yeah.
You know?
This is why in the secret schools, prior to Theosophy, it was only passed on to disciples who had proved themselves to be morally ready for it. The key was morals. It wasn't intellect, it was morals. Once you showed yourself to be morally fit for that knowledge, it was given to you. And then KH&M gave it to the world. This is why it was such a serious business. This is why we shouldn't undervalue Theosophy. Such a privilege to have this knowledge. It really, never mind, I got chains and rounds, it's doing my head in. Why do you think they gave us that knowledge if it's not just to do our heads in? And if you can't think of a reason why you should understand chains and rounds, then you're still not getting it. Because this is life. Everything is chains and rounds. We point to chains and rounds to show the great architect that is in our lives.
Yes, we've got to be ready for it. We've got to be ready for it.
Ready for it. You've got to be
Spiritually
ready.
ready.
Absolutely, yes, we've got to be ready.
We're not spiritually ready, of course.
Yeah, we've got to be ready for it.
Can I just ask, have you got any recommendations, any book recommendations on the minor and the major initiations?
I'll send it to you all if you leave me your email addresses.
The list is ready. The list is in there.
Yeah. Thank you very much.